Hey guys, let's keep diving into chapter 3. So now we're going to look at some of the other sections from chapter 3 in this second lecture. And I love this first picture of a thief, I before E except after C. And then the person spells THCEIF. That's hilarious to me because, as I pointed out in the prior lecture, we have this distinction or this problem between our sound system and our spelling system where it's not always clear. And so we can't rely on the rule of spell it how it sounds, because why is it EI or IE? And why are there these arbitrary rules there? So we're going to dive into this further connection between sound and spelling. And we left off chapter 2 by discussing phonological awareness. And I really stress to you that phonological awareness was necessary in order to bring students, learners, into reading and writing. And this is the same case for learners in every language. It doesn't matter if your first language is Mandarin or if it's Korean, or if it's English or Spanish. Phonological awareness is key for all of those language speakers to move into reading and writing. And so it also doesn't matter if it's your first or second language. You need phonological awareness of whatever that target language is to move into reading and writing. I want to clarify that phonological awareness, so those exercises and those things we covered in chapter 2, at the end of chapter 2, is not tied to intelligence. So just because you might have a student who is exceptionally phonologically aware does not mean actually that they have a higher level of intelligence than the student that is struggling with it. Conversely, if you have a student who's struggling with phonological awareness, right? So they're going to be struggling to move into that reading and writing. It doesn't mean they have an intelligence problem, okay? This is a separate issue. It's nothing to do with intelligence or capability of the student on the intellectual level. And then one thing I stress with phonological awareness is that it's an ongoing thing. We don't practice phonological awareness with those exercises I showed you and then stop it once we move into reading and writing. Reading and writing, in fact, furthers that phonological awareness. So it works together. It starts blending together to continue phonological awareness with that student. So we've talked about phonology, which is the sound systems, and we're going to move into orthography, which has to do with the writing systems. As future teachers, we need to understand the connection between sound and writing in order to teach literacy. Another term for orthographic skills is graphophonemic skills. And you saw me use this term kind of in the last lecture with phonographo, right? So you're linguists, so you can think about what those terms mean. And phonemics means sound, graph means writing, okay? So when we say graphophonemic skills, we're talking about spelling, sound skills and how we use those together. And so we want to develop our students' orthographic skills. And the reason, and one reason why we discussed English is so complicated, because a lot of letters can represent a sound, right? So we've got the sound, and we've already explored how the sound can be represented by an F, the letter F in fish, or a PH in phone, or a GH in enough, right? So the sound to symbol relationship, the sound to graph letter, the sound to letter relationship is actually really complex in English. And it's complex in other languages as well, but on some levels it has a little higher complexity in English when we compare it to a language like Spanish, for example, which we will do later in this lecture. So to really show you how complex it is, this is a chart from your book. Let's take a look at the phoneme sound E. Okay, so you recognize in the brackets there, I have the phoneme, it's a vowel, and in English that's E, okay? But let's talk about all the different ways we can spell that sound. Look at these words. We've got C as in ocean, C as in I see you, scene, as in a movie scene, receive, thief, amoeba, and machine, okay? Let's look closer at the spelling. When I'm talking about C, as in the ocean, that has two sounds in it. You can see the spoken phonemes in the right-hand column. S, E, S, E. When I spell the word, though, I spell it S-E-A. The E-A is what gets the E sound. Okay, awesome. So I'm a young learner. I'm learning how to read. Awesome. I know when it's EA, maybe it gets the E sound. Let's go to the next word, see, as in I see you. Well, now I've got two E's. And now I have to realize, okay, so when I get two E's or an EA, it might get the same sound, E. And then you go to seen. Okay, when I get E, followed by a silent E, I get the E sound. Then we go to receive. EI gets the E sound. Then you go to thief. IE gets the E sound. You're seeing that meme on the first slide, right? When the person spelled thief, THEI, because look at this. There are some options in English for how to spell the sound E, and there's a handful of them. So it's really complex. So when we say spell it how it sounds, how do we know? Because I have, what do I have here? 7 different ways to spell the sound E in English. We call the symbols on the right phonemes, right? So the word sea as an ocean has 2 phonemes. E, there's 2 phonemes in there. What do you think we call the letters? That's why I have a question mark there. We call those phonemes, and we call the letters that represent the phonemes, we call them graphemes, okay? So a phoneme is a basic unit of sound, like p, p, p. And a grapheme is a unit of writing that represents that sound. So we can use the letter, the grapheme, P, to represent the sound P. All right, we're going to dive into that more. So if you didn't get it yet, it's okay. We're going to spend some more time with it. English has 44 phonemes. We know that because you have your IPA charts in front of you all the time. I know that. And there are 44 sounds on there. But we only have 26 graphemes. We only have 26 letters to represent those sounds. Spanish, in contrast, has 30 graphemes, so 30 letters, to represent, we're going to say 30 sounds, okay? So already, we're going to come back to Spanish and look at how that's a benefit for the Spanish language, how it makes it a little more clear than English in some ways regarding orthography and guessing spelling and sound. But you can already tell English, our numbers outweigh, right? So we have a lot more phonemes than we have letters. So the reality is we have to get a little creative with how to represent all these phonemes in writing when we only have 26 letters to do so. So let's dive into these examples a little more. A grapheme, by the way, is an umbrella term. It's a letter or a combination of letters that represents a single phoneme, a single sound. I have single bolded for a reason that I'll get to later in the lecture. So again, a grapheme is 1 letter or 2 letters or 3 letters or 4 letters that all represent a sound. So let's look at some examples. So the letter F, that is a grapheme representing the sound F. Okay, so like fish. Okay, the letters TH are a grapheme because together those letters can represent the sound as in, well, it could be there, this, 3, right? There's 2 different TH sounds, but TH together can represent one sound, right? Depends what word you're working with. We have IGH. Think of a word that has the letters IGH in it. Let's start with sigh. Sigh. Okay? And in that word, sigh, it's made up of 2 sounds, 2 phonemes. I. And we spell the phoneme I. Oh, I just flipped you off. I did not mean to do that. I. Okay, I'm going to leave it in here because you're probably tired and need to be woken up. There you go. We spell that sound I with IGH in that particular word. Okay, but keep in mind, we can use a lot of different letters to spell the sound I, depending on the word it's in. But IGH is a grapheme. It's 3 letters, but it's considered one grapheme for the sound I in the word sigh. We can also have a grapheme that's 4 letters, so OUGH. Think about the word through, through. There are 3 phonemes in that word, and the last phoneme is oo, and we spell oo in that word with O-U-G-H. Okay, so when I say grapheme is an umbrella term, it's an umbrella term for letters that represent sound. So a grapheme is a unit of writing, whether 1 letter, 2 letters, 3 letters, or 4 letters, that represent one sound. Okay, not 2 sounds, not 3 sounds, not 4 sounds, 1 sound. Okay, we're going to keep building on this, so it's okay if you don't get it yet. It's an umbrella term because there's different types of graphemes. We have graphs, which is when you have 1 letter that represents 1 sound. So if you look at fish, the F in fish represents the one letter F represents the 1 sound. When you look at letters, when we have 2 letters that represent 1 sound, we have what we call a digraph. So a graph is when you have 1 letter, 1 sound. A digraph is when you have 2 letters that represent 1 sound. So we've got phone, and in the word phone, the PH represent those 2 letters are a digraph representing the 1 sound. Okay. We also have a trigraph, which is when you have 3 letters representing the 1 sound, and 4 letters representing 1 sound is a quadrigraph. Okay. I want to draw your attention to the trigraph real quick again. Remember that I don't want you to get confused here, because I know some of you might be looking at that phoneme inside the brackets that gives the sound I, and you're like, but that's 2 sounds because you see 2 symbols right there. No, it's not 2 symbols. Remember, those 2, that shape, those 2 symbols together represent the diphthong I. So even though it looks like 2 phonemes, it's 1. It's just the symbol that's used to represent I. I'm going to hit that again because I see a lot of mistakes in some of the online work you'll be doing because people forget that some diphthongs are represented by like the 2 symbols, right? But it still represents 1 sound. There's a reason I have graph and digraph bolded, and that's because you are going to hear about this concept in other classes. If you haven't taken them already, you will come across these 2 terms again. They typically only talk about graphs and digraphs. They don't typically go into trigraphs or quadrigraphs, but you need to know that those concepts exist because they do, and you're going to be working with language learners, and you're going to find that occurrence in some of the words you're working with. Okay, so remember, grapheme is an umbrella term for types of graphemes. You can have graph, digraph, trigraph, or quadrigraph. So let's start drawing a connection here. I want you to look at these words, would, shoot, and writes. And I want you to pause the video, and I want you to think how many graphemes are in the following words, and how many phonemes are in the following words. So remember, graphemes are letters that represent the phonemes, and phonemes are the sounds in the word. I already gave you the answer to the first one, through. Okay, there's 3 graphemes in that word, and there happens to be 3 phonemes. I would like you to pause the video and go ahead and try it. Practice makes perfect, okay? Pause it and hit play when you're ready, but I'm going to walk you through how you find the answer, but go ahead and try it by yourself first. Hit play when you're ready. Okay, I want to walk you through how to answer this question. And when you see the answers later for those 3 words, if you didn't get it right, you will by following these steps. So if someone wants to know how many graphemes or phonemes are in a word, the first thing you need to do, step 1 in this class should always be translate the word into IPA. Okay, as you're working through orthography and any assignment you've got with orthography, always translate your word into IPA first. So here's our word through, and I have translated all the sounds in the word ooh into the phonemes, right? So step 2, once you've translated your word into IPA, is to connect the dots. Okay, so I know the word ooh has 3 sounds, and it has all these letters. So what letters represent what sound in the word? Well, I know the TH in through represents th. So I drew a line from the TH to the symbol, to the phoneme th. I know the R in through represents the R phoneme, right? And I know the OUGH oo represents the phoneme oo. Okay, so I've started to connect the dots. So looking at this, how many graphemes are in the word through? 1, 2, 3. TH is one grapheme because it represents the one sound. R is another grapheme because it represents the sound R. And oo is another grapheme because it represents the one sound oo. Okay, I have 3 graphemes in this word. Well, how many phonemes do I have in this word? 1, 2, 3. I can literally count them. There are 3 phonemes in this word. Let's try another word. The word is opal. Sorry, I don't know why that's over there. Let's see if this messed up. Okay, yeah, whatever reason, opal. We want to answer how many graphemes are in this word and how many phonemes are in this word. Your first step is to translate it to IPA. And I've already done that for you, okay? So I have O, P, O. Okay, I have 4 sounds in this word. And now my second step is I want to connect the dots. So what letters in this word represent the different sounds? Well, the letter O happens to represent the sound, the phoneme O, O. P is represented by the letter P. Is represented by the A. And O, the O sound is represented by the letter L. So I have 4 phonemes and I have 4 graphemes because I have 4 letters representing the 4 sounds, okay? You might be a little confused, but it's okay because we're practicing. That's what this lecture is about. So again, when I ask you in this, how many graphemes are in the following words and how many phonemes are in the following words, the first thing you should have done is written everything in IPA. The funny thing is that I already gave that to you, okay? So your next step would be to connect the dots. What letters in the word represent what sounds? What letters in those words trigger you to produce the sounds you're producing? And so you would write numbers. Did you get this? There are 3 graphemes in the word wood, and there are 3 phonemes. There are 3 graphemes in the word shoot, and there are 3 phonemes. There are 4 graphemes in the word writes, and there are 4 phonemes. So here's the thing. Here's what most students forget, and it's the definition I gave you right away. A grapheme, whether it's 1 letter or 2 letters or 3 letters or 4 letters, right? So we had graphs, digraphs, trigraphs, quadrigraphs. Always represents 1 sound. So when you answered the question, how many phonemes are in the following words, and you came up with 3 or 4, that was the answer to how many graphemes there were. And you know that by connecting the dots. Let's see here. So grapheme. So again, I got the word through, and I show you how I had a digraph, which is when I had 2 letters representing 1 phoneme. I had a graph. I had 1 letter representing 1 phoneme, and I had a quadrigraph. I had 4 letters representing 1 phoneme. So I had 3 phonemes and I had 3 graphemes. Okay. An English phoneme can be represented by more than 1 letter. Okay, it's not 1 letter, 1 sound, right? The letters that represent one phoneme can create a grapheme. So even if it's 2 letters that make you produce the sound, then that's a digraph. That is a grapheme. Again, I've highlighted the word 1 phoneme, and there's a reason, because there's a couple tricky words in English we'll get up to in a second. But this is the basic premise of it, and this is what you need to know. And even though we have some anomalies in English, it doesn't matter. You just need to know that how sound connects to letters. So why do we care? Because, and there's my son's spelling for because again, as children learn to read, they must learn to map these things together. They need to map the sounds, the phonological awareness they have, the phonemes they know, to spelling patterns, to graphemes. They need to know what letters correspond to what sounds. And there is a pattern here. So I want you to look at these words right here with the TH beginning. Now keep in mind that the TH, digraph, can get 2 different sounds. It can get like a quiet thing, or it can get a voice them, okay? But look at all these words. Thing, them, then, that, the, they, think, these, think, through, throat, thorn, this, those. That was like a tongue twister. That was some alliteration a little bit right there. The pattern that a student would get from this is that the TH gets 1 of 2 sounds. And this is the type of mental mapping they need to do. And eventually they'll map which one gets the voiced TH sound and which one gets the voiceless one. But there's a pattern here. So even though we just talked about how the spelling between the spelling and the pronunciation system in English can be a little messy, there are some patterns. So there are some connections that are going to be easy for your students to get. It's not all out the window. Okay, there's a lot of hope and a lot of regularity also in our spelling system as well. If you're at home, I want you to, well, obviously you're at home because you're not with me. Go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to look at these words. And I want, we are focusing on a type of grapheme. So when a phoneme, a sound, is represented by 2 letters, it is called what? What type of grapheme is that? It is called you can pause if you want to look it up, but it's called a digraph. Okay, I want you to look at these words right here, but sorry, I'm a screen ahead of myself. We've got some really common digraphs in English. So again, we're trying to help students make the connection that when they see certain spellings, they can guess the sound. Now, we know when we say ghost, ghost, think about the GH. You never give it an H sound, right? You never go, you're like, g. You just give it the G, the g. When we think about words like no, not, knob, that all start with KN, there's always the consistency of getting that n sound, and no one's giving it the K. So here's some pretty predictable digraphs that once students make that correspondence of the phoneme ortho correspondence, they can start basically picking up the reading or the pronunciation side of reading, right? So these are some common digraphs in English that have pretty predictable sounds with them, right? I would like you to look at, this is the exercise I was getting to, I'd like you to look at these words and figure out which of these words has digraphs. Are there any that have digraphs? Not all of them do. In order to figure this out, you have to start with step 1. Step 1 is you need to write each of these words in IPA. And then you need to do step 2, which is connect the dots. Which sound, now that you've written the word in IPA, goes with which letter or letters, okay? So I'm going to look through and take the time to do this because it'll make a huge difference for you moving forward, especially before your next online works. Go ahead and pause the screen and practice and hit play when you're ready because I'm going to show you the answers. Okay, these are the words that had digraphs in them. So we had sh. The SH in shoot is represented by a digraph, right? Sh is one sound represented by the 2 letters SH. The oo in shoot is one sound, oo, represented by 2 letters, the double O's. So that's how this works through. If you have any questions on this, contact me. I will walk you through them. But these would be the correct answers. So if you got something else that's confusing you, reach out to me. So at this point, because of Chapter 2 Phonology, if I were to ask you to identify phonemes, you could do that, right? You've got your IPA chart, and if I say to you, tell me the phonemes in spray, the word spray, you would think about the word A, okay? And you'd realize there's 4 phonetic sounds in there, and you would look it up on your chart, and you would write it out, right? So I've got my 4 phonemes right there. And then I can say, after what I just showed you with graphemes, I'd say, I want you to look at that word and tell me how many graphemes are in that word. So I want you to think, before I tell you the answer, how many graphemes are in the word spray? There are 4, because there are 4 phonemes. You have the graph S, representing the sound S. You have the graph P, the letter P, representing the sound P. You have the graph R, representing the sound R. And you have the digraph, the letters AY, representing the one sound A. Okay? So these are 2 skills you've acquired at this point, and you're going to practice the second skill a little more this week in your online work. But now you can do this, okay? This isn't hard. This just takes practice, I promise you. So try the exercises in the book and in this lecture if you haven't given it the time of day yet. Now that you know these skills, I want to introduce you to some complications. what I call trickies, okay? There are some exceptions. There's always anomalies. Everything we teach you in any of these classes applies to most things, but not everything. So I just want to talk about a couple anomalies, a couple trickies, because they exist. And you just need to know that, yeah, they exist. That just is what it is. What I basically just told you is that for every phoneme in a word, you have a grapheme that represents it. So for every sound in a word, there's a letter or letters that represent that sound, okay? And you notice, if you look at the past slides, I highlighted the word one phoneme or single sound, right? So all the letters, even if it's one, graph, digraph, trigraph, or quadrigraph represents one phoneme. There are a couple words, though, where that's not the case. And these two words would be perfect examples. So there's probably more than these two words, but these two words are great examples. I want you to take these two words, pause this video, and write these words in IPA. Okay, go on and give it your best shot. Okay, so look at these, say these words out loud: human, university, and write them down in IPA. Hit pause and then hit play when you're ready. Okay, so you maybe came up with this or maybe you didn't, but they were probably a little tricky because we're realizing something really quickly, which is that this goes against what I just told you, which is that every sound or that a grapheme only represents one sound. Okay, so let's look at the word human. Sure, the first grapheme, H, represents the single phoneme. The second grapheme, U, represents two phonemes, which totally goes against what I told you. It represents the two phonemes, Y, U, U, Y, U, okay? So, same with university, we've got that U, Y, U, two phonemes that are represented by one grapheme. There aren't a ton of instances of this. This isn't to make you feel like you have to doubt me or anything like that. I'm just telling you, I always have a student point these out, so I'm just going to call it like it is. We don't even have a name for it in linguistics. We have graph, digraph, trigraph, quadrigraph, but there's no name that I can find that linguists have validated for a name for when a graph represents two phonemes. But there are some instances of that. So if you choose hard words for any of your online works, just be aware that you might come across some anomalies like this. So this was tricky number one. Let's talk about tricky number two. Okay, when we're talking about mapping the graphemes to the phonemes, there are some words that aren't really innate for us because we're so hung up on the spelling, right? We've drank in the English spelling Kool-Aid, and now it's hard to break down the phonemes. Again, we want students to know what letters correspond to what sounds. So let's look at these words right here, and I have a feeling none of you would have a problem with it. Apple, a bull, bubble, candle, okay? When you come across, or Google, right? When you come across the LE, you have learned at some point, you've mapped the grapheme LE to the graphemes LE to the sounds right? So, but if I asked you to write this in IPA, you're going to have a little bit of a challenge. And I'm asking you to write them in IPA. I want you to try it. Same with the RE ending. So think about fire, tire, acre, spire. You basically graphed that graphophoneme correspondence, that relationship that the RE can get the sound. Okay, I'd like you to pause this and write these in IPA. And I want, like my chart there with opal, I'd like you to write out the phonemes and write out the graphemes, the letters, and try to match the sound with the letters. Might be a little tricky. Some of you will get it, but I'm going to show you the answers in the next slide. But please pause this and try this because I want to show you tricky number two. I'm going to show you the answers now if you're ready. Okay, so there's a consistency here. So one, yes, you've done a great job. You have mapped together that the LE gets the ol sound on some words and the RE gets the sound on some words. But mapping it to its phonemes is a little more tricky because what you're realizing is that the LE spelling gets the schwa ol sound. Okay, and so it's like, do I map the grapheme E to the left, to the schwa. It's not one for one, right? It's hard to do like what I did with opal here. It's not easy to do that because what you've got is an X, right? Where you've got this schwa in there, the schwa sound aligning with the final E, and then you've got the L over here aligning with the ul. So you make kind of, those last two lines would look like an X. But there's a pattern here, right? So there is a pattern that learners do pick up on, even though they're not going to be mapping phonemes and graphemes. There's a pattern here, so it's not awful. It's that the words that end in LE get the ul sound. But specifically, in order to get to this, you had to be aware of something, and that's you had to be aware of syllables, okay? So there's plenty of words that end in LE or RE that don't get the ul or the sound, okay? There's plenty of words that end that way. One consistent thing these words have in common is that they are two-syllable words, okay? Apple, able, bubble, okay? And there's something you learned about syllables and vowels back in phonological awareness that told you that the second syllable had to have a schwa in it. Some of you, when you translated this into IPA, might have not put a vowel there. You might have put app and then put the ul phoneme, but you didn't put a vowel there. The rule we learned about syllables back in phonological awareness is that every syllable has to have what? A vowel. So the second syllable, apple, had to have a vowel sound in it. It did. The second syllable of fire, had to have a vowel sound in it because that's the rule. And typically in English, it's the schwa. Okay, you're going to see the schwa a lot. It's like our go-to sound. I call this tricky number 2 because it's not as easy to draw up like a lot of other words will be. The LE and the RE can be a little more complicated, which is why in your last online work, your phonology one, I said, hey, if you want to make it easy, maybe steer clear of words with the L or the R, because a lot of students will pick words like this and they're like, oh shoot, this isn't as easy to map out. And this is the reason why. Again, there's patterns here. This is great. There's a pattern here your language learners, your young readers and writers will learn the same way you learned it. But from an educator standpoint, you're starting to see some of the technicalities and seeing at a deeper level that it's the mapping isn't always clear. Okay, our last tricky number 3 has to do with words that end in ER, OR, or AR. Again, we want students to map together that these combinations of letters can combine with certain phonemes, and you can. So, I mean, I know you're reading these words: mother, weather, father, batter, tractor, editor, visitor, sailor. Okay, so I gave you examples of ER and OR. The reality is, whether it's ER, OR, or AR on some words, it's always going to get the same sound, the schwa and then the R. So here's some examples. Here's a breakdown phonetically of those words ending in ER, OR, AR. So the crazy thing here is that I can make the schwa, the E, the schwa, and then the sound, and I can spell it at minimal 3 different ways in English, right? So what we have here is a pattern, though. We can show students when it's these 2-syllable words like this that end in the ER or the OR, AR, it's going to have a predictable sound. And that predictability is great, right? But phonetically, it's a little interesting, right? Because if it's an E or an O or an A, it's all going to get the schwa. So where's the line drawn? So I call this tricky number 3 because it's the spelling. The spelling has to do with where the words came from. So why do we have ER or 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 AR? Why don't we just make it all ER across the board? Well, it has to do with the original language it came from and how it was said in the original language. But luckily, there's some consistency here. Okay, let's transition to Spanish real quick. Not all languages are like English. I hope you know that by now. That's why I've got him going duh. So Iron Man there. So English has 44 sounds, and English has 26 graphemes, right? Our alphabet is 26 letters. Spanish, though, has 30 sounds, 28 to 30. We're going to go with 30 because it depends what dialect and what literature you're looking at. And it also has 30 letters, 30 graphemes. So on page 106 of your textbook, you'll see this graph. I've already given it to you actually in earlier lectures, but if you haven't printed it or accessed it, go do that. So here we can see the Spanish alphabet, which is the top line, or you actually saw this in your last online works as well. The top line is the Spanish graphemes, letters, the letters of the alphabet, okay? The dark green line are the phonemes that correspond to those letters. So we're going to, again, some publications say Spanish only has 28 phonemes. We're going off the fact that it has 30 letters. So you will see below. So we're just going to go with 30 and 30 to make it clean. Okay, so let's compare Spanish and English real quick. This is the interesting part. Spanish phonemes to graphemes is more of a one-to-one correspondence, unlike English. And if that doesn't make sense, let me tell you and show you what I mean. So in Spanish, when you have a letter, a grapheme, it typically represents one phoneme. There's no variability like in English, and I'll show you English again, an example. So when you, in Spanish, in a Spanish word, when you see the letter A, you know it gets the ah sound, okay? Letter A isn't going to get the schwa, like we just looked at the AR endings. Words that end in AR can sound like right? We have a schwa there. Nope, in Spanish, it's always going to be ah. There's no other sound we're going to give it. So we have one letter representing one sound, and we call that a one-to-one correspondence. That one letter isn't going to also represent this sound in this word, but this sound in this word, and this sound in this word, not like English. And it's pretty consistent. Spanish is it's pretty one-to-one. We've got a couple other, inconsistencies. It's not perfect. So the letter B and the letter V, they can both get the b sound, but great, because when I'm looking at Spanish words, if I come across the letter B or the V, I know it's going to get the same sound. Doesn't matter. It's always going to be b, right? The letter C can get two different sounds. So depending on the word you're looking at, it can get the th or the s sound. Same with the letter G, has two different sound options. Remember we talked about digraphs? Digraphs are when you have two letters, two letters representing one sound. So they have ch, as in like cheese, right? CH. They have the double L digraph, right? Representing like that you. And then they have the double R's, which represent that, like that trilled R sound, okay? So, but really overall, compared to English, it's a lot more one-to-one. We get a letter and you know what sound it might be. There's no guessing. So pay attention though, I circled over here the letter I, and it goes with the sound E. In Spanish, when you get the letter I, it's always gonna be E. Unlike English. So I showed you this chart at the beginning of this lecture. In English, when you get the sound E, it might be spelled E-A, E-E, E-N-E, or E with a silent E, E-I, I-E, O-E, or I with a silent E, okay? So when I come across these words in English, I don't necessarily know innately as a young learner that it's always the sound E, 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 right? Spanish, on the other hand, every time you see the letter I, you know it's the E sound. So you got minuto, ir, días, gracias, right? So you've got gracias. I'm messing up all the phonemes, but I do know I'm right on this. So it's a lot more predictable. It's a lot more one-to-one. In some ways, it's a lot easier, right, when we're looking at it orthographically and picking up the spelling, unlike English, where the one phoneme E can be represented by numerous spellings. So if you want, you go ahead and pause the video, but I'd like you to look at these Spanish words, and on the left I've given you the phonetic translation, and in the second column is the Spanish word itself in the spelling format. If you don't know Spanish like me, there's the English translation in the third column. But I want you to look at how many letters are in each of these Spanish words and how many phonemes are in each of these Spanish words. Go ahead and pause if you need to, but I'm going to show you the answers. So for the most part, when you look at these words, for how many letters are in the word is also how many phonemes are in the word, okay? There's not a lot of digraphs or trigraphs or quadrigraphs. In English, you can have the word through, T-H, R-O-U-G-H. you can have a 7-letter word that has 3 phonemes, okay? Because we have all these digraphs, trigraphs, and quadrigraphs. In Spanish, you can have a 9-letter word that has 9 phonemes, meaning every letter in that word is getting a sound. Unlike in English, where maybe 4 letters only represent 1 sound. So there's a couple exceptions here. If you go down to the English equivalent of hero, so I don't want anybody here to laugh at me. I know y'all are. I know you. So E gets the A sound. Okay, so hero, heroe, heroe. I'm forgetting what that sound is. Okay, so now you'll notice that there are 5 letters in that word, but only 4 phonemes. And that is because the letter H in Spanish often is omitted of the sound. And we can see that back here on the chart. If you find the letter H, there's no sound there. It's not usually given a phonemic sound. So you see some exceptions like that. But really across the board, it's a lot more one-to-one, 1 sound to 1 letter versus English. So there's problems too if we're looking at Spanish speakers learning English or English speakers learning Spanish. There's problems when there's not this consistency between the languages. The lack of letter to phoneme correspondence creates problems for English language learners. Almost every letter in a Spanish word gets pronounced, okay? So if you have a 9-letter word in Spanish, almost all of those 9 letters are going to get a unique phonemic sound. So why might this be a problem for a Spanish speaker learning English? Because when you have come from a language where every letter in a word gets a sound, and you come into a language like English where maybe 4 letters only represent 1 sound in a word, you can get negative transfer. This is a term we've talked about. A negative transfer is when some facet of your first language, some rule that you use in your first language, you try to apply it to your second language or your target language, and it doesn't transfer well. It's a negative influence. So what might this look like, though, for a Spanish speaker coming from a language where there's this phonographic correspondence to a language like English, where it's a lot more arbitrary? The negative transfer is that a Spanish speaker might try to produce a sound with each letter in the word. So we look at a word like island, right? English word, or the English pronunciation of that word is island. A Spanish speaker would look at this word and they see the letter I. We just looked at that word in Spanish, right? What sound does a Spanish speaker give the letter I? E, right? So they see the letter I and they're going to apply E to it. They see an S and they're going to give it the sound. So they're going to say, they might say Island instead of island, because they're coming from a language where each letter gets a sound, and a native English speaker would not give the S a sound, and the I would get the I phonemic sound. We saw this with the word sheep, right? So a Spanish speaker would see the S and the H. They don't have the sh in their language, so they're going to most likely say ch. They don't have the digraph, E in their language, so they're most likely to change it to the closest sound and to make it the E sound. So a Spanish speaker is more likely to say sheep instead of ship. A Spanish speaker is more likely to say cheap instead of ship, right? This is some of that negative transfer that occurs. We've already talked about this, actually, when we go back to phonology and we looked at vowels. Back in that lecture, we looked at some of this correspondence. You didn't know it, but we were also discussing orthography at that time and how the spelling, if you're looking at the spelling system of your first language and applying those rules to that second language, you might have negative transfer. Okay, so again, why do we care about all this? Because as children, when they're learning to read and write, or adults, when they're learning a second language, they must be able to start mentally mapping together how sound can relate to different spelling patterns. So they need to know what letters correspond to what sounds. And there are some patterns, okay? So I'm using the TH as an example. It's great because there's 1 of 2 sounds that TH is going to get, and those are some of the mappings that our students are going to be doing. I want to end this particular lecture with an example TEA question. Okay, this is the practice exam question. The information I just gave you can help you answer this question. This whole presentation can help you answer this. You have the tools to do it, but I'm going to break down the question for you before you think about it. Here's a legit practice question. Some common vowel patterns are associated with more than one pronunciation. For example, bread, mead. Which of the following nonsense words illustrates a vowel pattern that is highly consistent in pronunciation? Okay, we got to break this down. First of all, we got to look at what they're asking here. Some common vowel patterns, they are talking about vowels. They didn't say consonants, okay? They're talking about vowels. They're talking about patterns. They're talking about more than one. And we look at the spelling they gave us, bread, they even underlined EA. And mead, they underlined EA. Okay, so focus on that. Don't get lost in the B, R, or Ds, okay? They are associated with more than one pronunciation. So now you need to think pronunciation. So are we talking about orthography or phonology there? Pronunciation sound. We are talking about phonology. Bread, mead. The first thing you need to do with a question like this is think about IPA, phonetics, phonemes. You should break these words down into phonemes, okay? Or at least in your head, be thinking about the vowel pattern. Bread, EA sounds like eh, but in the second word, EA sounds like E. Okay, so here's the thing. We've got this EA spelling, and it's associated with more than one pronunciation. In some words, it gets eh, and in some words, it gets E. That's what they're talking about here. So, which of the following nonsense words, by nonsense words, they made these words up, illustrates a vowel pattern that is highly consistent in its pronunciation? So they're telling you that bread and mead are not consistent. Because if you have a spelling pattern that can get two different sounds, that's not consistent. Consistent is when a spelling pattern gets the same sound. That's consistent. Okay. So you need to look at these four words, and I'm not going to read them to you, and you need to figure out, based on the vowel patterns, remember they're focusing on vowels, which of these words is the most consistent, meaning every time a student comes across this vowel pattern, they're likely going to pronounce it correctly because there's one sound that it always gets. Okay, pause the video, give it a shot. It's harder than it looks, but when I show you the answer in a second, you'll see it finally. Pause the video, hit play when you're ready, because I'm going to pull up the answer now. Okay, here's the answer. The answer is B. Please let me know if you got it, because it's actually, most students go, oh. Okay, a lot of you knew the answer right away, and I love hearing people work in groups on this question for the reason that I say, okay, guys, read these four words, and immediately the group will turn to each other, and someone will say stook, and the other one will say stook, 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 stook. And they go, oh, well, which one is it? Is it stook or stook? Okay, it's probably stook. Okay, I don't know. And then they move on to the next one, right? The funny thing is that they already eliminated the first one without even thinking about it. Because the moment they realized that they could give the double O two different pronunciations, because they just did it in conflict with their group, they showed it wasn't consistent. And then they go down to B, and everyone's like trone, trone, okay? Spow, spo, mo or moo. Okay, so they get to these and they rule them out, but they're not aware they do it. I can show you phonetically why B is the answer. If you look at, well, by the way, you could say, you look at the word took, and the double O can get the sound, or you can look at the word spool, and the double O can get the ooh sound. So that's not consistent. It's a vowel pattern that's associated with more than one pronunciation. Same with spo or spow. We've got wow, O-W, you can get the ow, or mo, O-W, you can get the O. And then you have through, sorry, I meant this underscore, the O-U-G-H. Ooh can get the O-U-G-H can get ooh, O-U-G-H can get O. Okay, so that's not consistent. Remember, these are nonsense words, so you got to be thinking outside the box. Look at B though. O-A, that's the vowel. Trone, lone, loaf, full, toast, roach. Okay, now it all gets the O, low, Oh, full, toast. Oh, I get confused. Yeah. So now I always have a student point out to me the third one, F-O-A-L, and they say, no, it's foul, foul. But if you look up the word, we actually say it wrong. It's full, full, and that's a baby horse, right? Everyone wants to say foul, and it's not, it's full. So that's the consistent one. The answer is B. O-A gets the same phonemic sound in every word that it's in. Okay, hope that didn't discourage you. It's actually a hard one. You're learning the skills to be able to answer a question like this. That concludes this particular lecture. Move on to our last one for orthography and move into the assignments, and that will wrap up this chapter. Let me know if you guys have questions. Bye.